Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining me. I am your host, Patrick Bark, and this is the Bark Night Podcast. So, today I am going to do my New Year's 2022 special, and my guest is going to be Lena Bark. So, if anybody is just joining for the audio, Lena is my dog. So, if you hear her slobbering or moving around or groaning, that's just her being a big baby. She also might just fall asleep. Who knows what will happen? So a couple disclaimers as we go through this is these are all my favorite things that were released this year. These aren't what I'm saying are the best things. So a lot of this is very much skewed towards my taste and not what, for example, the Academy Awards would call the best anything. So an example of that would be romantic comedies. So I looked at all the romantic comedies that were released this year, and A, there weren't that many released, and B, I didn't watch any of them. So I don't have a best romantic comedies. I also don't have a best drama section. I really like dramas, but at looking at all the ones that were released this year, it looks like there are, in fact, a lot of good ones that were released. I did not watch them. So I omitted that entire category. But I will say that the one that I do plan on watching that I haven't watched yet is the Banshees of Inisherin. I believe it's called. It's got Colin Farrell in it, and it is the same director and the same actors as the movie In Bruges. Really like that movie. It's a solid drama. It's almost like a dark comedy too. Really looking forward to this. So that's one that I'm going to check out. That I've got pretty high hopes for. Maybe it would have made the list if I had watched it already, but I didn't. So my first category of today is going to be action movies. So there were a pretty good amount of action movies released this year. I've left a few off the list that I didn't think were going to be my favorite. So what I do have here is, so I've got Everything Everywhere All at Once. So this movie, it hits on a lot of different genres, and it's a really, really such a good movie. So that's one of the ones in this category. You're going to see. I'm going to bring that up a couple more times. It's a lot of genres, and it's a very unique movie. Another one is Prey. I did a whole episode where I talked at length about Prey. Everybody knows how I feel about Prey. It's a really good movie. So another one is Top Gun Maverick. It probably would have been my favorite action movie had there not been one I liked more. But Maverick was really good. I think it hit on a lot of things that action movies have been missing lately, and that is most of all practical effects. I got on a big soapbox last episode about how much I appreciate practical effects. So there's a lot of practical effects here. They were actually inside fighter jets. You've got Tom Cruise doing his best action star thing, and it really is. I mean, as far as sequels go, especially sequels from the 80s, it's one of the best out there, and we got a chance to have that this year. I think it's a great continuation of the story. I think it's great. It's got a great soundtrack, great direction. All of the stars in it do a solid job. John Hamm is great in it. So there's so many things to like about this movie. And I guess I'll just say right now, it's my second favorite. Another one that's up there is Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness. I think it's a pretty solid movie, but it didn't make my top, but it's good, but I think it's got some critical flaws in there, and it's almost not really an action movie, but it's like Marvel horror, which is basically action. So that's one that's on my list. The Adam Project with Ryan Reynolds and Mark Ruffalo was on there. That was really good. It was my introduction to that director who also did Stranger Things season 4 this year and is also doing Deadpool 3. And I've got high hopes for him. I really like this movie. It's also not my favorite, but it's good. Another one that isn't my favorite that I thought was at least worth mentioning is The Northman. I think this movie is extreme. It's such a brutal movie. So it's as far as like Viking movies go, it's great. I think expectations for a lot of people were not quite expecting this to be what it was. It's a Viking revenge movie. That's it. You know, it's not. There's not an in-depth story to tell, but it's a revenge movie. So you've got a lot of Vikings chopping people up. You've got a ton of really good visuals, Robert Eggers, the director of this, is one of my favorite directors. He also did The Witch and The Lighthouse, and I'm really looking forward to seeing what he does next. So this isn't, once again, it's not my favorite, but it's on the list. So if we were doing the Oscars right now, this would be a nominee, not the winner. But it's solid. Another great action movie that is on my nominees list is Black Panther: Wakanda Forever. So this movie I did a whole episode on, and so you should know about how I feel about it. If not, go watch that episode. It's only like 20 minutes long. But I liked it. I really enjoyed it. So with all of that being said, my favorite action movie of this year was The Batman with Robert Pattinson. If I had done a category of favorite comic book movies, this probably would have won that, and then we could move Top Gun Maverick or Everything Everywhere All at Once into the top category. But as it is, I didn't do that. I just stuck with action movies. So The Batman, I think this movie is one of the director had a vision for this. It's very much visually and I think thematically what I wanted out of a Batman movie. It's got a detective story. It's got a great soundtrack. It's got great visuals. The cinematography is great. I think it captures a lot of these shots. You could see if somebody grabbed these shots and just cartoonized them, they would look exactly like a comic book. And I think that's really what they were going for. And so this movie, I mean, it's got probably the best car chase of the year in it. The car chase between Penguin and Batman was really good. I think there's so much to like about it. I know not everybody loved this movie, but it's my list. So my favorite action movie of the year was The Batman. And next up is horror movies. So there were a ton of good horror movies released this year. So some of the ones that I enjoyed. So here are the nominees. So Smile. I really enjoyed Smile. I think it's got some flaws. It's got some things that maybe don't make sense or maybe just weren't explained as well. And I think that's what kind of holds it back for me. It's got a lot of jump scares too. But I think it was far better than I ever expected it to be. I think that it was very dark. It was very sinister. It actually reminds me a lot of the movie Sinister, which is the same director as the first Doctor Strange movie. And he also did The Black Phone that came out this year. I still haven't seen The Black Phone. I hear it's really good. I also heard it's not scary, but it's a great horror movie. And so that probably would be on the list of nominees, if not for me having not seen it yet. So, Smile, that's a good one. Nope was also on my list of horror movies that I saw this year. Upon seeing it, I will say I was a little disappointed in it. There were some things that like the big reveal of what actually is going on in the movie I thought could have been done a little bit better. And I don't want to ruin it for anybody. I still really like the movie. I think it's got a lot of great performances in it. I think it's got great directing in it. Also has a good score. But I thought the reveal of the actual antagonist of the movie was what was a little bit disappointing to me. So it's still on my list, but you know, it is what it is. So another one would be Scream, the new Scream movie. I really enjoyed. It's got a great cast. It's got the old cast and the new cast, and it's going to be followed up in 2023 with a new film that includes the cast of this movie. I think Courtney Cox is the only one of the original Scream movies that's coming back for this one. Another one that I saw that I figured was at least worth mentioning because I haven't mentioned anywhere else is Umma. So that's one I literally watched on a flight. And it was exactly what I needed it to be for that flight, which was a brainless horror movie. I will say, it's not a great movie. But it's a horror movie that I saw, so I figured I'd at least bring it up. But if you've got an hour and a half and you want to eat it up with some sort of brainless horror, this is a just fine watch. Another one that I saw that I did really enjoy is Hellraiser. So there was a Hellraiser, I guess it'd be considered a reboot. And I thought, so leading into this, I watched the first 3 Hellraiser movies before watching this. So I'll say I really, really enjoyed this new Hellraiser movie, and I think that it touches on a lot of the themes, on the spirit of the, at least the first two. I'll say I didn't really like the third one that much, but it was okay. It was what, like, it, that one felt more like it felt like a different version of a Jason movie, you know. But the new one I thought did a lot very well. Some that I didn't see this year were Men, The Menu, and Fall. I've heard good things about all three of those movies. I just haven't gotten around to seeing them yet. So, if I do see them, or when I see them, I will, I guess, let you know what I thought of them. Anyways, so my favorite horror movie of this year has to go to Barbarian. So this is another one that I touched on in one of my other episodes, but just so you don't have to go back and dig that up. Basically, what I really like about this movie is that going in, you don't know what you're walking into. You don't know what the movie's about. You get very little information from the trailer. And for me, that was an experience all its own. What I really like is first time viewings of things. So this gave you just enough for you to want to go see it. And then once you get there, you're spending the first probably half hour of that movie trying to figure out what's going on. And then you start to figure out what's going on, and it changes gears completely. So I would say you don't really know what's going on until 45, 50 minutes into it. And once you realize that, for one, maybe you don't like the movie that you're in at that point, because you're like, oh my God, it's this kind of movie. That is not my kind of movie. You know, like it's like going into what you think is going to be a slasher, and then halfway into the movie you realize that's like an exorcism movie, and maybe you hate exorcism movies. I don't know, but so that I could see turning a lot of people off, because it once you realize what you're in. For me, I was like, oh yes, like let's go. Like this is what I like. I'm a big fan of almost all things horror. I don't like like brutality or intense gore just for the hell of it. But that's not what this is either. It's very well done. It's very well directed, well acted. The writing is solid, and I think the mystery of it is what really got me. So that's my favorite of this year. So next up, I will do my favorite animated movie of the year. So I'll just come out and say it right now. Didn't watch very many of them, but I wanted to include this category just because I did watch a couple. So for one, Turning Red would be on my nominees list. I watched that. I really enjoyed it. And so I think there's a ton to like about that movie. The animations are good. The story is good. It's like a coming of age story. And I mean, it's about red pandas. Love red pandas. So they're probably my favorite animal. So that would be the runner up. Past that, honestly, didn't watch that many animated movies. I didn't watch a lot of the Disney stuff that came out. I didn't see Disney's Pinocchio movie. And that one's like half animated, half live action. And I also heard it wasn't very good. So didn't see that. So my favorite was Guillermo del Toro's Pinocchio movie that premiered on Netflix. Now, I, for one, am really glad it premiered on Netflix. I don't know if I would have gone to see it at the theater. I probably would have, because I'm a huge stop motion fan. I think it's an art that takes a ton of patience to achieve. And Netflix even released a making of, featurette to go along with it. Now, this movie, I think there's so many things to like about it. I think it's truly his vision for what this story is. I think visually it incorporates all of the things that were, I think visually it incorporates his ideas of what the original story could be. So, I guess, for example, the whole scene of Geppetto creating Pinocchio very much seems like a horror movie, like a Frankenstein's monster type thing. and like, there's thunder and there's lightning and he's creating it. It very much gave me Frankenstein vibes during that. But then at the end of it, he's created a son for himself, opposed to creating a monster. Which, I mean, on one hand, you could kind of get those vibes from the original Frankenstein story, and it gives me the vibe that, like, that Shape of Water is like his creature from the Blue or Black Lagoon. Pinocchio's his Frankenstein. He released The Cabinet of Curiosities on Netflix this year. That's his H.P. Lovecraft. And I'd love to see what he does next. But I think that this story specifically is done extremely well. The music is good. The animation's good. The sprites that are in it are very interesting. His view of the afterlife in it is done extremely well too. It almost gave me at a few different points like Tim Burton vibes. And how Pinocchio interacts with all the different characters throughout the movie is all done so well. And I would say that it's definitely, if you haven't seen it, please go check it out. It's so good. And I hope I didn't spoil any of it for you. But I didn't touch on any of the major points. But, I mean, in all honesty, most people know what the major points of the Pinocchio story are. The only difference is here it's told through a different lens. So the circus is a little different. His journey is a little different. It's done in a way where it's not like the Disney movies where they're literally just recreating it. And instead of it looking like a cartoon, it looks like live action. It's nothing like that. It's truly a vision. It's his version of all of this. So it's definitely worth checking out. All right, so TV shows is my next category. Now, I think this one for me was especially tough. I looked online to see what a lot of places were calling the best TV shows just so I could get a gauge and get a little reminder for myself of, like, what did you watch? Because it's not like I was planning on writing this episode all year and taking note of my favorite things. Maybe I'll do that next year, but I didn't do that this year. So I was looking online and I'm like, all right, what is everybody saying were the best shows? Okay, so there's that list. Now, what did I watch? Okay, there's that list. And so this is kind of trying to come up with that in the middle. And I mean, I can only watch so many TV shows, so this is not comprehensive whatsoever. So here's my list of, like, the nominees / what I watched. Some of them aren't that good, but I figured I'd include them just because I watched them. First one, Outer Range. So Outer Range, I thought, was a great first season. It's setting up what could potentially be an amazing show, but it's very much a mystery that is still being unraveled. I don't quite know what the show is about. What I do know is that it is basically, to me, it reminds me of if you mixed Yellowstone with Lost. I like both shows, so that was interesting to me. That's what it looked like. That's what I felt I was going to get. That's exactly what I got. So it's worth checking out. It's got Josh Brolin in it. It's got Imogen Poots in it. It's got a few other actors I can't think of offhand. Will Patton is in it. So it's a great show. It very, like, it's if you think Yellowstone and Lost, do those sound interesting to me? If they do, check the show out. If they don't, you probably won't like it. Another one is Rings of Power. So this one I kind of felt disappointed in the end. I feel like it had a lot of highs. It also had a lot of lows. I think there's a ton of room for improvement in it. I don't think it quite captured the magic of the original Lord of the Rings movies. I think one of the main problems is that they're following up arguably the best trilogy of all time. I mean, whether you maybe you're a Harry Potter person, or maybe you're a Star Wars or a Star Trek, it doesn't matter. There's an argument to be made that is the best trilogy. I, for one, think it's amazing. I think that it was always going to be an uphill battle to follow that up. The Hobbit trilogy did not compare, I don't believe, to the original movies. And I think this is probably not quite as good as the Hobbit movies either. And I think one of the major problems here is also that they're trying to tell a story that has never been told before. Even in the original Lord of the Rings books, he never tells the story of how exactly all of these groups were tricked into these rings. He just says that they were. So it's a hard story to tell. Another one that I really liked was The Sandman. I thought that it was done extremely well. Visually, it was extremely striking. So that was one I really liked. A lot of people that are fan of the comics really think that the show captured that very well. Another one that's on there, House of the Dragon. I thought it was done well as a prequel to the Game of Thrones show. I think that it still has a ton of the flaws that the Game of Thrones show has. There's an entire episode that I could barely tell what was going on, and sometimes it's just brutal to be brutal, and there weren't that many moments where I was that surprised with where the plot was going. I also think the time jumps were extremely distracting during it, because it's hard to connect with the characters when you're constantly, oh, okay, 10 years later we missed all the character development there. You're just supposed to accept that, like, oh yeah, and then the war happened, and here's the finale of it. It's a weird way to tell a story, but I thought it was worth mentioning here. Another one that I really liked was Wednesday. So that was released on Netflix. I'm a massive fan of the Addams Family franchise, and I think this caught the magic of that franchise very well. It was also, I mean, a ton of scenes from it went viral on social media. A ton of people were watching this show. I can't wait for season 2 to get released. So that was a good one. And I guess the last two that I watched that aren't my winners would be Peacemaker and Resident Evil. Resident Evil was far better than I thought it was going to be. I don't think it's an amazing show, but I mean, if you're looking for a post-apocalyptic zombie thing, that's a fine way to pass your time. Also, I'll say that it got canceled, and so it doesn't really end on it kind of ends on a cliffhanger, but it kind of wraps itself up well enough, I guess. So I mean, I'm not upset that I watched it and the story won't be finished. Maybe it will be someday. Who knows? Peacemaker. I thought that was great. I think John Cena did a great job. James Gunn did a great job. It got enough people watching that and watching the Suicide Squad that James Gunn is now in charge of DC. So that's good. So the two, oh, and a ton of Marvel stuff got released this year. None of it, I would say, is on my favorite list. A lot of it was decent enough. Some of it was good. Some of it was like, eh. But, you know, a ton of that got released. I watched all of it. So I guess the two that I think got released that are my two favorites are Stranger Things Season 4 and Andor. So I did a whole thing on Andor, and so everybody knows how I feel about that. Stranger Things Season 4, I think, was done extremely well. The music incorporated into it. They're still leaning into the D&D theme. They expand more into the world of the Upside Down, and just so much of it is like visually good and good from a storytelling standpoint. And now we're about to go into our final season of that, so it'll be good to see how that all wraps up. But I'll say, out of the two, I think my winner for favorite TV show of the year has to be Andor. It was super well done, and it's told in 3-episode arcs, and I think every one of those arcs gets better as you progress through it towards the end, and I think the finale was great. So if you haven't seen that, check it out. Okay, so my next category is mini series, so limited series. So the three that apparently a lot of people are talking about that I didn't see are Dahmer, The Dropout, and The Last Days of Ptolemy Gray with Samuel L. Jackson. Apparently those three limited series are really great. I know that Dahmer was especially controversial. I didn't see either of those three. I plan on checking them out eventually. We'll see what happens when I do. The two that aren't my favorite would be Moon Knight and Obi-Wan Kenobi. Moon Knight I really enjoyed. I'm looking forward to... I included it in limited series because I don't think they've announced a season 2 yet, but I do think they're going to. But it was the first season ran as a limited series, and I think they might go back on that and change it to a first season. Obi-Wan, definitely a limited series. I also think that I wouldn't be surprised if they did a season 2 of it and stopped calling it a limited series, but that's what it is right now. I was a little disappointed in Obi-Wan for how long it took to come out. I think they could have filled some of the plot holes with it. But, you know, it is what it is. My favorite miniseries has to go to Blackbird, though. This one is a serial killer show about a guy that has to go undercover. So he's in prison, and the FBI comes to him, and they ask him to go undercover at a higher security prison and befriend a serial killer and try to figure out where he's hidden all the bodies of his victims so that A, they can find those bodies and give them to the families, and B, so they can capture and convict him. Well, they've already captured him. So that they can convict him of all of their murders. It was done super well, and I think you should check it out if you haven't seen it. The next on my list, the next category is Best Mysteries. So, real quick, this is what I saw that I think should be included here. So we got Death on the Nile, we've got See How They Run, The Batman, and the new Scream movie. I think Death on the Nile was a lot more visual substance over story substance. They started off with like a whole storyline of how he got his mustache, which I thought was like the most ridiculous thing I'd ever seen. There's a ton of problems with this movie, but See How They Run, I thought it was a decent comedy flick. I'm very glad I didn't pay to see it. I just saw it on some random service, and it's good enough. It's got Sam Rockwell in it. He does pretty well, and it's a murder mystery. You're going through the whole movie trying to figure out who murdered a certain character. So it accomplishes all those things in a well enough way. The Batman, I've already talked about that a bunch. The new Scream, I think it accomplishes exactly what that franchise needed it to at this point, which is let's kill a bunch of teens and keep the franchise going, and they accomplished that. So good for them. So my favorite, Glass Onion. I just saw this like 2 nights ago because it just came out for Christmas, and I honestly love this movie. It has a great cast. It's got a lot of twists in it. Daniel Craig is doing great. What's interesting about it is this was actually wrote like 2 years ago and filmed like a year and a half ago. And now that it's released, it's right in the middle of all of this craziness going on with Elon Musk. And a lot of people think it's very much about Elon Musk. But Elon Musk wasn't in his controversial position that he is right now with having just become the CEO of Twitter. And like so much is going on there that I don't need to touch on. You all know about it. But there's some serious parallels to be made with his character and with the one of the main characters of Glass Onion. And the director's come out and been like, it has nothing, that is not what I was writing this about. And watching it, you can tell. And watching it, if you know that this was filmed a year and a half ago, you know that it's meant to be any CEO. You know, it could just as easily be about the guy that just got arrested for the FTX fraud. It could just as easily be about Elizabeth Holmes. You know, it's meant to be the craziness that is CEOs in many cases. It could just as easily be the guy from WeWork, you know. So there's always a parallel to be made. There's always going to be a crazy CEO out there. I bet if we watch this movie again in a couple years, there's a new CEO doing something crazy out there. Everybody's calling him a genius, and the other half of people are calling him a crazy person. You know, I think that's the type of person you probably need to be a CEO. But yeah, so with all that being said, I really liked Glass Onion. And I think as far as mysteries go, especially like murder mysteries, I love murder mysteries. And I love that we're getting more of them nowadays. Whereas like for a few years there, it didn't seem like a lot were being released. But I hope this franchise keeps going. And that was my favorite of the year. Next, comedies. So I will say, disclaimer, I didn't watch very many comedies this year. But I did watch some, so I'll include them here. So I'll say first, One that I watched was Everything Everywhere All at Once. I had this in another category too. I think it definitely qualifies as comedy. It's genre bending in so many ways that I bet that, I mean, I can't imagine what genre they put down for this if they run it out for some awards. Probably, it could be drama, it could be action, it could be comedy, it's science fiction too. It's doing a lot and it's doing it well. Another one was Day Shift with Jamie Foxx. I thought this was a great horror comedy. It's not scary like at all, but it was released by Netflix this year. It's one that I saw and I quite enjoyed it, really. I think my favorite comedy though was probably The Unbearable Weight of Massive Talent. So if you don't know what this movie is, it's a satirical look at what Nicolas Cage's life may be like, and it's hilarious for a Nicolas Cage fan, which I'm a massive Nicolas Cage fan. I went with a group of friends and we all wore Nicolas Cage pants there, and it was hilarious, and this movie's hilarious. And if you're a fan of Nicolas Cage and his movies, there's a ton of references. There's references to Face Off, to Con Air, to Vampire's Kiss, to Raising Arizona. There's so many references in this thing, and it's done extremely well. I would actually really like if they followed up with this, because I think it could be explored a lot more too. But yeah, that was probably my favorite comedy this year. All right, so I guess the final category for 2022 for my favorite things would be my favorite movie overall. And I've got to give this one to Everything Everywhere All at Once. So it was in a lot of categories in this because it touches on so many different things, but I have to say it was a unique experience. It was the acting, the action, the visuals, all of it is done so well that I feel like this has to be my favorite. And if you haven't seen it, please go check it out. I don't want to spoil everything for you, but basically it's a multiverse story that really dives into all of the possibilities of a multiverse story. Way more than Doctor Strange did. And I felt like a lot of people expected this of Doctor Strange and didn't get it. And I think we're going to get it with the next Spider-Man cartoon multiverse story, but I think it's the best version of that we got this year. And so nice job to everybody that made that movie. It's definitely my favorite of the year. All right, Lena, so what was your favorite movie this year? Oh, really? All right, so she is going with Dog by Channing Tatum, which is, of course, a dog movie about a German Shepherd that her and I watched together. And yeah, that was a pretty good movie. Yeah, as far as dog movies go, I would say it had a lot of humor, it had a lot of heart, and I would absolutely watch that again. It's probably worth including a worst movie category since I had a best movie category. I mean, I've watched some pretty bad movies this year. One that I didn't watch that I'm just going to give it to this movie because of everything that happened with it. Probably Morbius. I still haven't watched Morbius, but that's probably the worst movie that was released this year, right? Maybe. We'll give it to that. And the final thing I guess I wanted to touch on was the best movies from other years that I didn't watch until this year. So that would be the first one, Hostels with Christian Bale. That was a Western that I watched that came out like 5 years ago that I finally just watched. And I loved it. And I was like, oh my God, why didn't I watch this? I didn't watch it because I thought it looked very boring. It didn't turn out to be boring. And it has a ton of great performances in it. But that was a good one that I watched. Another one is The Night House. Great horror movie. And a lot of good performances in it as well. I also watched Paddington 1 and 2 finally, and I watched them literally because of a joke at the end of The Unbearable Weight of Massive Talent where the one character is trying to convince Nicolas Cage that he needs to watch Paddington 2. And so I watched both of them, and they were both awesome, and I highly recommend both of those to anybody. And one I just watched just a couple nights ago is called The Endless. It's a low budget sci-fi movie. And honestly, it's probably one of the best science fiction movies I've seen in a long time. And it's in that same vein as like the movie Old or the movie The Incident. It's got a lot going on with it. I don't want to spoil for anybody what's going on in it because it really is one of those movies where you're piecing it together piece by piece as you go through it. But if you like science fiction movies, please check this out. It's very good. And another movie that I saw this year that I actually really enjoyed was a movie. It's an Indian film called Tubelight. So, interestingly, I looked this up while I was watching it to see what the ratings were, and it got absolutely ravaged by the ratings. So, apparently, a lot of people didn't like this movie. I really enjoyed it, and if you like Indian movies, probably worth giving a shot. It's probably considered like a dramatic period war comedy, and which, there aren't a lot of those, and it's probably a touchy subject for a lot of people, but it's got Salman Khan, Sohail Khan, and Shah Rukh Khan in it, and it's worth checking out if you are into Indian movies. And I watched it for free online, so you can probably find it somewhere. Basically, the story of this movie is that there's two brothers that are as close as brothers get, and one of them gets drafted into the military in 1962 and goes away to fight in the India versus China war. And so one brother's drafted. The other brother they don't let come in because he doesn't meet their qualifications. So he stays back in the town while his brother is away fighting, and he's super depressed about it. And what ends up happening is that his uncle makes him a list of all these different like things he needs to do to take his mind off of his brother being gone. So he's going around town trying to do these good things, and in the process he meets a Chinese woman and her son who've ran away from China and are staying outside town, and he develops a relationship with them and gets very close with the son. And there's some racial things that are brought in because of the fact that there's this war going on and there's these Chinese people here, and what does it mean to be staying in another country while they're fighting your country. So I mean, I think a lot of people understand what that is in the US, given that during like World War II there were the same thing happened here with like Japanese Americans that were here, and it has happened with a lot of people from the Middle East that were living in the United States during those wars. So there's some interesting parallels there that are made. It's a good allegory for that while also being a fun comedy and a feel-good movie. So worth giving a shot if you like Indian movies. I mean, I honestly don't watch very many Indian movies, but I really enjoyed this. So, it's probably worth giving a shot either way. But yeah, so that's all I've got for my favorites of 2022. So I hope you enjoyed this episode. If there's any movies that I didn't include here that you're like, oh my god, he needs to watch this, please shoot me a message or shoot me a text if you have my number, whatever. Let me know what you think. Let me know what your favorites are. And I'll see you in a few weeks for another episode. Thank you.